Hello, I'm Jo Watts. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about data strategies. A data strategy is perhaps one of those things that you think that only large organisations have. Or maybe it's something you've been thinking about but haven't quite got around to yet. Or you're just not really sure where to start and are putting it off for a rainy day. Whatever the reason, today I'll be aiming to convince you that it's something all organisations should have, no matter what their size. All organisations nowadays have systems, and those systems capture data that could be used to make better decisions or understand your clients better, or improve your processes, or innovate to provide better services, or just comply with legislation. The questions I'll be answering today include, what exactly is a data strategy? That's probably one of the first reasons we put off doing one. We're not quite sure what it is. I'll also cover why I believe all modern organisations need one, and what it should contain, and what it shouldn't contain, with some tips on making it successful. Finally, I'll explain the steps I undertake to develop one, and when to know when we're done, so that we can stop planning and start to actually use our data effectively. Just to introduce myself, I'm the founder and CEO of Effini. Effini is a data solutions company based in Edinburgh. I set up Effini 4 years ago to address what I saw as a gap, where large corporates were building highly skilled data science teams, while smaller organisations and startups were struggling to utilise their data effectively. I started out as an astrophysicist and spent some time initially as a software developer, before spending most of my career as a data scientist in financial services. I've had quite a broad experience in the world of data, from building analytical models to building the systems that implement them, and I've also built up data governance and analytical teams. All of this has given me quite an insight into the challenges we all face when attempting to work with data. At Effini, when starting out with our clients, we normally start with a data strategy, which is why I'm here talking about them today. We've done about 30 different data strategies for all sizes of organisation across all sectors. And then we move on to actually helping to deliver some of the activities and the roadmaps we develop through our data science delivery capability. And finally, we do a lot in the world of data skills. I believe the skills to work effectively with data shouldn't be just for data scientists, which is why I've spent the last year writing a textbook for school children to learn data science, and why we do a lot of training to data users within all types of organisations. If you would like to get in touch with me after this talk, one of the best places to start could be one of DataKind's office hours sessions. I'm also a volunteer for them. I'm a non-executive director of GamStop, which is the national online self-exclusion scheme for gambling, and an ambassador of the great work the Data Lab are doing in Scotland. I like to think of a data strategy simply as a plan for how data supports the organisational strategy. Put like that, really it should just be part of the organisational strategy. However, given most organisations don't actually have a data strategy at the moment, it does need a bit of a kickstart, so it benefits from being addressed separately. I also wanted to say a few words about the difference between a data strategy, a data management strategy, and an analytics strategy, as that can often be quite confusing. Sometimes they're separated out, but in my view, they're all the same thing with a slightly different focus. I would expect a data strategy to contain a number of activities that are focused around effective data management, and would also contain a number of activities around improving analytics capability. However, they can't really be separated. We've all heard the term garbage in, garbage out. If we continue to do more analytics, more sophisticated analytics on low quality, unmanaged, insecure data, then we won't achieve what we set out to do. So I recommend creating a single data strategy that is balanced across data, analytics, and systems. So why do we need a data strategy? If we think of data as being an organisation's most valuable asset, then we need to use it effectively to create value. It is said that data-driven organisations perform better, are more profitable, and retain more customers than those that aren't. That's why it's so important to focus on your data. Sometimes the problem is too many things that you could do with your data, and we can't do all of them. That's where the organisational strategy comes in. It allows us to focus on the most important things that will benefit the organisation and to prioritise the order we do them in. Data implicitly comes with risks, whether these are keeping it secure or complying with the General Data Protection Regulation, By undertaking activities that address these risks as part of the data strategy, you as an organisation could be far more comfortable with using data effectively. One company I worked with actually had their entire ERP system sitting on a single machine in their managing director's office. Someone could have easily broken in and stolen that machine and they would have lost everything, all their orders, their client contact details, everything. So in their case, the priorities were quite clear. They had to move their systems to a secure cloud location before they could start to do anything else. Data can also be used to identify new areas for growth. So if the strategy is focused on developing new products, then the data strategy might focus on activities that help with that. Finally, it's important to write down the strategy and communicate it so that everyone is, from the board downwards, is clear and supportive of the plan. Treating data as an asset is actually quite tricky to do in practice, which is why many organisations put off getting on top of their data. Data is generally a bit messy, and it requires the kinds of skills that we haven't been explicitly taught, either at school or in our careers to date, to sort it out. One of the key challenges we normally see is data quality. So if your data is not in a good state, you're not alone. There are many reasons why the quality of data is not brilliant. From manually keying errors to user errors to systems with bugs baked into them. One key reason for poor quality data is a lack of documentation, telling us what it is, where it is, what it means, or who uses it. And if no one has actually defined what good quality data should look like and written it down somewhere, we can't report on the quality of the data and see where the problems are and which systems need to be fixed to improve it. Most organisations, especially charities, are required to do quite a lot of reporting with their data. This is often done manually using spreadsheets, which takes up time and resources, which also leads to additional errors. Clients have often said to me that they spend so much time creating reports that they never spend any time looking at them and interpreting what the data is telling them. By automating this reporting, the time can be put to better use, and the output becomes more trusted since the process is more regular and repeatable. The final challenge I'm going to mention is around legacy data systems and processes. Quite often, organisations aren't quite sure what data they have, or perhaps if they do, what processes it supports, even if it's secure. So making big system changes can often seem daunting if all of this hasn't already been documented. So again, we find ourselves putting it off. So if any of these challenges seem familiar to you, then don't worry, you are not alone. These are the kinds of common challenges we face when we're trying to get on top of our data. So we've convinced ourselves we need to get on top of our data, and we're going to develop a data strategy. But what actually should be in it? The good news is that there is no set framework out there for one. However, there are some key ingredients. It should certainly lay out the vision of what the organisation is aiming for, and it should have a real honest appraisal of the current starting point. This needs to be not only across data and systems, but also assess the organisation's capacity for change and capability to deliver some of the activities. Becoming data-driven within an organisation is a fundamental shift in the culture. People will have to do things differently. They'll have to learn new skills and give up old cherished activities. So ask yourself honestly, what might need to change in terms of structure and leadership to enable this to happen? One common mistake is thinking that becoming data-driven is a single project, but it isn't, it's a journey. So the data strategy needs to be a living document that evolves over time. So instead of creating a monster document that no one will ever read, write down some guiding principles to support this change and leave the details of exactly which data sets and processes will get replaced to a lower level of detail. The key gaps between where you are now and your vision need to be identified. These gaps are quite often about skills, but could also be around technology, tools, and systems. These then lead to a set of activities or projects. There's often a natural order for these activities. For example, there's no point in implementing data quality rules in a system that's earmarked for replacement. However, there's also no point in just transferring poor data quality into a new shiny system. So make sure the data cleanup is in there before moving to the new system. In my experience, the roadmap often writes itself. You'll also find that not everyone is quite as keen about this journey as you are. So there will need to be a number of activities that will need to be identified to support adoption of your data strategy so that people are able to clearly see the benefits to them, their role, and the organisation as a whole. The way to do this is to include a number of quick win activities that deliver real value early. Ideally, they will also support an element of upskilling and learning as you go. However, don't forget about the long-term goals. What are the activities that you need to undertake to get to your ultimate vision? It may or may not be necessary to develop a business case that underpins your data strategy. However, if you do, remember it's not all about buying fancy tools or expensive data scientists. It's quite likely that money spent on upskilling existing staff at all levels of the organisation will be the most cost-effective activity you could undertake. Finally, don't forget to define what success looks like. How will you ensure you've been successful? Try and be realistic about what is truly achievable, and then be sure that this gets delivered by assigning ownership to individual activities. I thought I'd also give you some pointers as to where data strategies can go wrong, just so you can try and avoid them. As I've already said, becoming data-driven is a fundamental organisation-wide culture change, and data is a business asset. Technology are just responsible for the systems that hold the data, so this should not be considered a technology project. If it is, then you're likely to end up with lots of expensive new systems and no better data. In fact, treating it like a single project at all is probably a mistake. Yes, some of the activities within your roadmap will be individual projects, but don't set off expecting this ever to be done. Like I said at the start, the closest you might get to being done is if your data becomes truly embedded within your organisation and your data strategy becomes part of your organisational strategy. It needs to be realistic and achievable. We need to break down what we're aiming for into manageable chunks. We shouldn't be setting out to build and implement a highly complex machine learning model as the first activity, as we won't have the governance skills or systems in place to do that properly. Much more achievable is if we start out to integrate disparate systems and automate some of the reporting. That way, you can start to free up some people's time to learn new skills. And you can also start to surface up some of that data that hasn't been visible before. That's one of the most useful things you can actually do, is to make information visible to everyone and get them to start to act on what it's telling them. Another mistake some organisations make is to outsource the implementation of the strategy. I'm not saying don't seek help, as you may not initially have the right skills in-house, but make sure that your employees are involved and they're able to pick up the skills that they will need to build on any of the changes that an external organisation has developed for you. So, making a data strategy successful is almost the opposite of what I've just told you not to do. However, there are some additional things that will also help. Make sure there is sponsorship in place from as high up in the organisation as possible to make these changes. Data adoption isn't easy and sustained effort really is required. If priorities and funding switch away from data too easily, then it will never happen. So don't just make it one person's responsibility for delivery. Since this is going to affect the whole organisation, make sure the vision is clearly communicated. Alongside this, encourage staff to start to look at and use the data that they have more. Deliver training around ethics, privacy and legal issues so that they are knowledgeable and safe in what they're doing with it. And make sure the data is accessible to a wider group of users. Just by surfacing more information to everyone on an intranet page will start to turn the whole organisation into armchair analysts, which in turn will allow them to understand how data is actually being used to make decisions and improve services. Start to design everything new so that it can be automated. That doesn't mean putting everything onto a single dashboard. Dashboards are great, but they struggle when they try to be all things to all people. And finally, build everything up from simple use cases. That way, the deliverables are tangibles and the progress can be shown. So how do you get started with the data strategy? The first phase is planning. Make sure that the vision and the sponsorship are in place before you start. Then you can move on to understanding your current state, which will be the most time-consuming part of the exercise. I normally do a data audit by taking one-to-one interviews and reviewing existing processes, reports, and systems. I find the interviews really interesting, as they can often seem like data therapy to the interviewee. They're usually really happy to share their frustrations and challenges about what they can't do with data and what they'd like to do. This might actually be a good place to bring in a third party to help, as they can be more objective sometimes. I would suggest they're done on a confidential one-to-one basis, as you're more likely to get that honest appraisal of the current situation that you're going to need. There are generally common challenges identified that can be addressed with a single solution, or obvious gaps around data, skills, and systems that start to surface. So at this point, you can start to develop the roadmap and start to think about that set of quick wins and those longer term projects. At this point, I would suggest socializing the roadmap to ensure everyone is aligned around the priorities. And once you've done this, it can then be costed into an agreed business case. Then you can assign responsibilities to the deliverables and delivery can commence. I've already said that a data strategy is not a single project. So how will you know that you've done enough to have a successful plan? I think if you feel the way forward with data is now less daunting, then that's a really good sign. Have you got a clear plan in place that you think is realistic and achievable? And the final question to ask yourself is, are you now excited to get started with capitalizing on your data? If you feel excitement at the opportunity out there, then you should definitely stop planning and start delivering. I know that's a lot to take in. So if you'd like to ask me any questions, please do get in touch. My contact details are here and I'd be very happy to chat. Thank you very much.